What are you doing?
We were doing the thumbnail.
Yeah.
But like, basically, it's hazed out, and you can't see it lined up. And then when you click to go, like it goes 3, 2, 1, click.
Have you already shared the link, hon?
No, because you can't share the link until now.
Can you? Does it have to be a thumbnail of like you, or can you upload one?
I don't know.
Because if you could
Not yet.
upload one, you could just take a little snip of Matthew 26. And
We could probably upload something.
I don't know if that works. I don't know how YouTube.
I didn't remember what the second thing offered. It's gonna be at the top.
Go Madhouse and then there's no thinking.
Oh, yeah. So.
She's not quite as sarcastic as Samantha Bee.
You did more work than I did last time.
Who I keep thinking that's probably not her real name. Can't be. Samantha Bee. I keep thinking that's
Oh, what happened to Mickey?
That's a funny story.
Decapitating Mickey is a funny story.
We're live, so I'm not gonna say anything.
Wow.
Some people decapitated Mickey Mouse. And there he is.
He's still moving, even though he doesn't have that.
He does, yeah. Actually, he still moves, but his head is not on. There's a little plastic rod that's supposed to connect to another little bit, and it doesn't.
now that's a real crisis.
Yeah.
I mean, this doesn't look bad. This way looks really bad.
I think it's funny to just have the
Like nearly headless.
headless Mickey Mouse kind of still animated. Yeah. The best part is that this whole discussion of headless Mickey Mouse is going to be in the stream and in the recording, and I'm not going to say anything about the context of it. It's just going to be there.
And no one can see.
No one can see what we're talking about, so they won't know why we're talking about headless Mickey Mouse.
I've forgotten the word.
So later on, if you get a call from
Disney
headquarters,
If we get a call from Disney headquarters about our discussion of headless Mickey Mouse that does in fact relate to a real thing in reality, then that will indicate that we're getting far more exposure with these streaming videos than we ever thought was possible.
Or YouTube's algorithm is way better.
Or YouTube's algorithm is really good, and we don't give them enough credit. But yeah, yeah, Melissa's watching.
Hey, friend.
these professionals.
Hmm?
So we's professionals.
We's professionals, that's right. We totally know what we're doing. Yeah.
Actually, we could probably like mount a webcam to that paper towel roll and be like the perfect height.
Yeah.
Right at you.
So actually what I was thinking of doing is ordering on Amazon a boundary microphone. It's one of the ones that you see a lot in like conference rooms where you just set it on a table and it's better at picking up group discussions
Oh, okay.
without picking up the room noise as much.
Oh, that's cool.
Because
Or all the fish tanks.
we might just have to like turn the fish tanks off temporarily while we do this.
Yeah.
We'll be fine.
We're talking about a lot of death today.
Don't be named to the power of Jesus. I'm sure.
That's the ghost of
Yeah.
Anne Boleyn. I didn't know who it was.
We'll be totally fine.
I feel like you're concerned about death while we have headless Mickey.
Well, Headless Mickey is never actually alive, so he's not dead.
But he's moving.
He's waving at me.
Yeah, maybe he's undead.
'Cause what's the definition of being alive? I know I've heard it a couple places where, although he doesn't have it's like breathing or something similar to breathing is what they equate. It's like I think a 3-step process to be considered alive. Now I'm both
Depends on who you're talking to.
Yeah.
Is this the medical world or is this Star Trek?
Yeah, there is a Headless Mickey, and no, I'm not going to explain the context of that. And I'm just going to leave that right where it is. Yeah.
Interesting.
Somebody asked that.
Yeah, Amanda's on, and mhm.
I had heard that song before, but I didn't know it was about Anne Boleyn.
I mean, if we really wanted, not this time, but theoretically, we could do this through Skype too. Where we could just talk their question.
Yeah, we could video conference through Skype to do our thing. But that would be like work to get it onto YouTube.
No, you can YouTube live it. You just run Skype at the same time.
Yeah, I wonder if you could get the sound of everybody's Skype conversation to be part of
No,
the,
just whoever's watching remotely.
Mhm.
But for as far as the sound to come through YouTube, probably not. Well,
How does the church do it?
They just go straight to YouTube.
Well, I think it's plugged through the soundboard.
Oh yeah.
Or the cameras. And then
So-
the cameras are plugged into the soundboard.
Okay, that makes sense.
But it's still like one location, so it's not like computer and somebody Skyping in with computer.
yeah.
Although I imagine it probably doesn't matter necessarily to hear the outside conversations if needed.
So you just play the YouTube
I'm pretty
and can
sure
you
here,
can you
like what we're
listen
trying
to
to
it
do, is we
later on?
Skyped other people
Yeah,
in so they could
Because
As
it's
long as you
recorded
have-
on YouTube.
then
As long as you
YouTube would only pick it up coming out
You'll
of the
always be able to
speakers.
watch it.
The same way it's picking up like our conversation, it
Because
would
it's
pick it up
basically
out of the
how we
speakers.
set up.
yeah.
But that's really
These
just,
Because you can
that would
have
only be for the benefit
private,
of,
unlisted, and
does
public.
someone want to watch it
And private
later
means,
and
like,
understand the question?
You can
So
only
if we
watch
wanted to
it
get
if
real
you-
fancy,
And unlisted is
we could have one
once
computer
you have the link, you
that
can watch
ran the
it. You
Skype
didn't want to just
conference
public.
and then take the audio out from that and use that as the input into a second computer, what would be doing the YouTube stream, so that the entire Skype audio would be included with the.
I feel like that could be accomplished with one computer somehow.
That probably could be accomplished with one computer somehow.
Or you just clear off this table and put like 5 up here.
Yeah, but there would be at least 4 pounds of swearing associated with trying to get that done on one computer.
Well, let's just start small and add things later.
Yeah, we'll start small and then get accustomed to it not working very well and just live with it.
Okay, so I found the thing. So all living organisms respond to their environment, grow and change, reproduce and have offspring, have complex chemistry, maintain homeostasis, are built as structures called cells, and pass their traits onto their offspring.
Yeah, Headless Mickey doesn't do most of those.
That sounds like a lot more than 3.
That is
Well,
more than
I
3.
was remembering 3 things that
Yeah.
people talked about. Like,
Mickey didn't do those when he had a head.
basically, I think it was like reproducing,
He
growing.
still has a head. It's there.
It's just detached.
It's not with the rest of him.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay,
Matthew 25,
26.
2025.
Matthew 26. Yeah, and just responding to a comment here, people visible on camera would be obligated to wear pants. At least if the pants were in fact visible on the video feed.
Depends on if you plan to stand up.
It does depend on whether or not you plan to stand up in front of the camera. I do not plan to stand up in front of the camera,
But you are wearing pants.
but I am wearing pants because I'm in public. Well, kind of
This
public.
was a response to questions?
Yeah, we have an audience.
Oh, my.
Yeah, there are in fact 3 other people that I'm aware of who are watching this right now.
3 other,
Yes,
Joel, Amanda,
Joel and Amanda and Melissa,
or whoever.
or whoever is paying attention over there. I don't know.
They could put you up on the big screen.
They could put me up on the big screen over there. I would have no idea.
You should ask them how giant
Yeah.
is your head over there.
Yeah.
So they could be looking up my nose right now.
I don't know if there's a 4K.
They do have a 4K TV over there. Yeah, this camera is thankfully not capable of rendering extreme detail of my nose.
Extreme Mike.
Yep.
Oh,
Yeah. No, my house is not really public. It's only kind of public, and there's people here, so I have to wear pants. Anyway,
besides that, your mother and father-in-law are here.
yeah, it'd be weird.
I mean, you were wearing the trainer shorts earlier. Most people find that acceptable in public to wear.
I'm wondering how this conversation got derailed onto my pants habits.
Whoever asked the question,
Yeah.
it's their fault. Who asked the question?
You know, we're stalling
So you
for
still
other people
think
to
that
join.
D&D might be more efficient online?
Well, but see, the other conversations can't be heard, although I see things flashing.
Yeah.
Because the people there have to type everything they say.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, I think we can get started. So, today we're in Matthew chapter 26. Does anybody remember what we studied last week?
Matthew chapter 25.
Matthew chapter 25. All right. So Matthew chapter 25 is a follow-on to Matthew chapter 24, which should not be surprising in any way. Matthew chapter 24 is a discussion about the signs of the end of the age. And one of the things we talked about was that the signs of the end of the age don't actually tell you when the end of the age is going to be. It just describes some of the circumstances that will be present when the end of the age occurs, because it's meant to be mysterious. That's kind of the point. And then chapter 25 is a discussion of 3 parables that describe the end of the age and what the kingdom of God is like and how it will be when it happens, if that makes sense.
But we also connected it to the end of 24, so there were 4 parables.
Exactly. So if you do connect it to the end of 24, there is a parable at the end of 24. So you have 4 parables that describe the content of Matthew 24. So the point of all of this is if you take those parables individually, you probably are not going to get the point. They're meant to be taken all together in order to explain the circumstances, the context, all that go along with what Jesus said in Matthew 24. And the general point of all of those parables is you have to live the way God wants you to live now, because you don't know when the end of the age is going to come. And the things that you do matter. So if you live stupidly, then what do we always say? Play stupid games, win stupid prizes, right? If you live well, you will be rewarded for living well. If you live stupidly, you'll reap what comes of living stupidly. Anyway, and then the last thing we talked about was this whole judgment of the sheep and the goats thing, because that has direct links back to the book of Ezekiel. Uses some very similar language that Ezekiel uses. And the reason Matthew would do something like that is to make you think about Ezekiel. And in that part of Ezekiel, Ezekiel was talking about God judging between the Israelites who were faithful and the Israelites who were abusing their fellow countrymen in order to either enrich themselves or gain power, influence, or whatever. So in Ezekiel, he talks about the judgment of sheep and goats as in the judgment of the powerful and the weak. But the implication is he's judging the ones who are powerful because they cheated and abused people versus the ones who were exploited in order to make the other ones powerful. So when you have the judgment of the sheep and goats in chapter 25, and it talks about, doing things for people that are charitable, you're supposed to understand, because you're supposed to know Ezekiel, that the context for that judgment and the context for the sort of charity and common decency that's expected is the book of Ezekiel. So all that being said, 26 is a hard break from this idea, and we get back into some more narrative events. So chapter 26, verse 1. When Jesus had finished saying all this, which is like the whole discussion of the end of the age thing, he told his disciples, "You know that the Passover takes place after 2 days, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified," which is kind of a funny thing because he kept telling them he was going to die, and they kept not getting it.
Yeah.
I mean, that one's pretty clear right there.
Yeah. Then the chief priests and the elders of the people assembled in the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and they conspired to arrest Jesus in a treacherous way and killed him. Not during the festival, they said, so there won't be rioting among the people. Now, we all know how this story goes because we've read this a bajillion times, right? And we've also seen how over the course of the last 20-something chapters, every single time Jesus talks to the religious elites, he picks a fight with them, right? They show up and they want to ask some kind of gotcha question to prove that he's not really the Messiah, and he flips it around and basically says something really insulting to them, right? And makes absolutely no bones about the fact that he really doesn't like them. So they want to kill him, but they're terrified that if they kill him outright, that it'll turn the people against them. Okay, verse 6. While Jesus was in Bethany at the house of Simon, a man who had a serious skin disease, a woman approached him with an alabaster jar of very expensive fragrant oil. She poured it on his head as he was reclining at the table. When the disciples saw it, they were indignant. "Why this waste?" they asked. "This might have been sold for a great deal and given to the poor." But Jesus, aware of this, said to them, "Why are you bothering this woman? She has done a noble thing for me. You always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me. By pouring this fragrant oil on my body, she has prepared me for burial. I assure you, wherever this gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be told in memory of her." It was kind of funny because Matthew made sure that would happen by putting it in his book. But here you have another reference to Jesus' expected coming death, right? And we know that the disciples still don't get it. But here, in a short span of time, we have two references saying, no, really, he's going to die. He's going to be buried. Yeah, quickly, soon, right?
Yeah.
And notice that we started this with Passover, right? That's the context for this. The whole idea was, hey, Passover is happening in 2 days, and then all this stuff is going to happen. Well, what's Passover? What's Passover associated with?
The deliverance from Egypt.
Deliverance from Egypt. Now, Egypt was judged.
Passover was the final plague of the passing over of the angel of death.
Exactly. So,
From blood on the lintel.
right. So Egypt was judged for a lot of reasons, but the context of that judgment, the way the judgment was expressed, was judgment against the gods of Egypt, against the paganism of Egypt, and against Pharaoh specifically, because Pharaoh considered himself to be a god, to be the highest god, right? So a lot of that judgment was, sorry, no, God doesn't agree. And the judgments were specifically pointed at tearing down that system of belief, right? Now, since we've been talking about Ezekiel, and there's so many connections with this book, we've covered in Ezekiel how Pharaoh gets brought up again, how the king of Egypt is brought up again in connection with the day of the Lord. And there's more judgments talked about with Pharaoh And the context that you're supposed to think about is the day of the Lord, which has been, a common theme in the Old Testament, but also the judgment of Pharaoh and Egypt from Exodus. So all that stuff is supposed to pop into your mind. Anyway, just you remember that, because that's what you're supposed to think about when you start reading this passage, right? So if the context for this passage is Passover, and if Jesus is saying he's going to die, do you think that might have something to do with the day of the Lord? If the Passover judgment, or I'm sorry, if the Passover event had something to do with the judgment against Egypt, and if the day of the Lord is constantly being compared to that, then Jesus bringing this up and talking about himself as a sacrifice is saying something related to that. Anyway.
Actually, I think the more interesting thing is that he was at a house of a guy with a serious skin disease,
Yes.
as opposed to this guy should be quarantined.
Well, they didn't have a CDC, and they were allowed to have gatherings of more than 10.
No, but
I know. I'm making a
like,
joke.
okay.
Because usually people are throwing peanuts at me.
Just because that was one of the things I was listening to earlier, where, I guess these aren't Jewish people, are they? Is
They are.
Simon-
Yeah.
Okay. So then, as a Jewish person, if you have a skin disease,
Right.
you are supposed to be cut off. And
Right.
if it's persistent, then you're supposed to be exiled and put out of
Right.
the town.
Right. Which kind of suggests that Jesus is changing those rules a little bit, doesn't it?
Well, I'm wondering. So I was wondering about that as when he read it.
Mhm.
That it was odd that he hadn't healed him yet,
Yeah.
but maybe he did, and that's meant to be past tense.
It could be.
A man who
It-
had.
he just kind of gets mentioned there, and then that's it. They sort of move on.
Because I don't know of anywhere else where Jesus sees someone with some sort of condition and he doesn't heal them.
He usually at least interacts with them in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. So I think we can either assume that the guy was healed, right? Because it is past tense, a man who had a serious skin disease,
Or the healing is just not mentioned.
or the healing might just not be mentioned, or there could be maybe a bit of an implication there that Jesus is the Passover lamb, but he's also God. What makes God unfit? Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can't make God unfit to serve in God's own temple. That's just a non sequitur.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I could see both of those, and maybe it's left ambiguous for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
When I look at the cross references, it references John,
Mhm.
where it mentions that Lazarus was the one who was sick,
Yeah,
and he's the one that Jesus raised from the dead.
that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So John might be giving us those details, but this guy doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was what Mary that
Mhm.
anointed him. I started looking because it's in. I didn't know which one it was, but it's in John that it's Judas is the one that has an issue with why.
Yeah. So, and this is a good time to talk about why are there 4 gospels, right? Because so you have 4 gospels because each of the writers has something that they think is important for you to understand.
Yeah.
So with Matthew, particularly, he keeps making these references to the Son of Man over and over and over and over again, which keeps pointing back at Ezekiel, right? So Matthew is pushing the Ezekiel button really hard when he writes his gospel. He keeps on doing stuff to get you to think about Ezekiel as the backdrop of what Matthew wants to say about Jesus. Whereas John goes a completely different direction.
Mhm.
So,
Well, and each one has a particular audience
right.
in mind.
Mhm.
With Luke actually writing to a very specific person.
Right. And Luke was writing to a Gentile. It wouldn't make any sense for Luke to put in all of these references to Ezekiel, who, a Greek would not know who that was. They wouldn't have the cultural backdrop. So this is very interesting.
The Sabins are watching.
Huh?
The Sabins
I know. I saw that. Hey, Ian. How you doing?
and others.
And others. There's many Sabins. 14. Then one of the 12, a man called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, "What are you willing to give me if I hand him over to you?" So they weighed out 30 pieces of silver for him. And from that time, he started looking for a good opportunity to betray him. And we know how this is going to go.
Well, actually, a question about this.
Yeah.
So, what function does Judas actually have here of betraying Jesus? Do they actually not know which one he is? Because I know it's the guy that I kiss on the cheek or whatever.
Yeah.
But do they actually need Judas to point? Oh, it's that guy right there.
So I'm really not sure about that. In that particular passage, it does seem, and we're going to get there, but in that passage, it does seem that at least the guards need to be told who he is.
Yeah.
But several of the Pharisees had previous, or not only the Pharisees, but the scribes as well, had face-to-face experiences with him.
Yeah.
But maybe because of, I don't know, this is complete speculation, right? But it's possible that those people would not want to be associated with the arrest of Jesus because of their fear of being rejected by the people who considered him a prophet.
Yeah.
And
That makes
in
sense.
many of the groups, he was considered the Messiah as well. So,
Politics.
yeah, politics. It would seem that maybe they wanted to distance themselves.
Especially the Pharisees, who the common folk was their bread and butter.
Yeah. Politician's going to politate, right?
Yeah.
Okay, 17. On the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Where do you want us to prepare the Passover so you may eat it?" "Go into the city to a certain man," he said, "and tell him, 'Teacher, my time is near. I'm celebrating the Passover at your place with my disciples.'" And I have to assume that there were more directions included that Matthew just decided not to write down because a certain man, who the heck is that?
It would be shown. It would be revealed.
Well, some have looked at it and speculated that this is somebody they all knew who it was, and
Yeah.
they knew.
Yeah, there's just got to be a little bit more backdrop than Matthew chose to write for whatever reason he had. So the disciples did as Jesus directed them and prepared the Passover. When evening came, he was reclining at the table with the 12. While they were eating, he said, "I assure you, one of you will betray me." Bum, bum, bum. Deeply distressed, each one began to say to him, "Surely not I, Lord." He replied, "The one who dipped his hand with me in the bowl, he will betray me. The Son of Man will go, just as it is written about him. But woe to the man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man if he had not been born." Then Judas, his betrayer, replied, "Surely not I, Rabbi. You have said it," he told him. I mean,
I'm kind of wondering why Judas would even speak up here.
Yeah.
I wonder.
Unless the one who dipped his whatever bread in the bowl with me,
Yeah.
unless that actually pointed him out.
It must have.
I think it must have. Otherwise, there's really no point in having this passage at all, right? I think that had to be where Jesus revealed to the other disciples
Yeah.
that Judas was the betrayer. But it is kind of cryptic. It's kind of
I'm just
mysterious.
saying, if the one who dipped his hand with me in the bowl, if that doesn't, to everyone there, points out Judas,
Yeah.
then Judas should just keep his mouth shut here.
Right. And if they're all using the same bowl, then it's kind of silly because, well, then who do you mean?
Yeah.
Isn't what needed to fulfill prophecy dipping in the bowl? I don't know. If you can think of the specific verse, post the specific verse, and we'll look at it. Okay. And as far as the bearing false witness thing, I don't know. Type something about how you mean that. Judas betraying Jesus? Yeah, I mean, he did have to get betrayed. Certainly. But the question, I think, is why does Matthew write the conversation that way? Answer to Justin's question. We'll have to leave this for another time because I'm completely lost and I don't know what we're talking about anymore. Yeah, that's on me. Verse 26. As they were eating, Jesus took bread, blessed and broke it, gave it to the disciples and said, "Take and eat this. This is my body." Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them and said, "Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood that establishes the covenant. It is shed for many for the forgiveness of sins. But I tell you, from this moment you will not drink of this, I will not drink of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it in a new way in my Father's kingdom with you." After singing psalms, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Okay.
Oh, I think I know what he means for the what function does Judas play in betraying? Why does someone actually need to point out Judas? Maybe it's somewhere in prophecy that someone that's probably anyway.
So, all right. So we talked about how the context for this is Passover, right? What happens at Passover?
Festival of Remembrance.
A festival in remembrance of what?
I said, and remembrance.
Festival and remembrance. It's a festival where they celebrate this first event where they shared a meal that was a sacrifice, right? Shared that meal with God. And then by the application of the blood from that sacrifice, they were spared from the judgment that was going to come on all of Egypt, right? So that is exactly what we're talking about in this passage, right? They're sharing a meal with God, and then the application of that blood will spare them from judgment. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. 31. Then Jesus said to them, "Tonight all of you will run away because of me, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered." And that reference is to Zechariah. So if you want to go look that one up, Zechariah. "But after I have been resurrected, I will go ahead of you to Galilee." Now, if they're still not getting the whole "I'm going to get killed" thing, then they must be doing some crazy mental gymnastics to avoid that statement.
Well, you think of it, at this point, they've been with this guy for 3 years,
Mhm.
and they've seen him literally tell a storm to not be a storm.
Right.
So I understand he's saying it outright, but I would have a hard time believing that dude's going to get killed too.
Yeah.
Because it's like, how? He controls the universe, apparently.
Yeah. Well, he just said he was going to get killed, and then he just said, "When I have been resurrected," and somehow no one takes that at face value. Right? They all assume that he must be speaking figuratively.
Yeah.
Or something, you know.
Well, quite often, like, say the weather says there's a tornado coming this way.
Yeah.
When it actually hits, the response is very different than we're told, okay, it's coming.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you look out and say, "Oh, yeah, it's a storm that doesn't look that bad."
Yeah.
But when it hits, it's like, oh.
Just like the coronavirus. It's
Yeah.
something that happens to other people.
Yeah. All right, 33. Peter told him, "Even if everyone runs away because of you, I will never run away."
Now, weren't the disciples fairly young in age?
I mean, there's no resource that says how old they were specifically.
Well, none of them were leaving any families, right?
Peter was married.
Was he married?
Yep.
No, I didn't know that part.
And we could assume that most of them would be married, because it was normal.
You know, what I was going to say is, like, if they weren't, then that kind of puts their age in a certain range.
Right. So if the most of them either would have been married at that time or would have been planning for marriage later, just because that was the cultural expectation.
Yeah.
unless you were like horrifically disfigured, or completely destitute.
Mhm.
That's where you were expected to end up.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, like Peter just keeps doing this thing where God incarnate says a thing and he goes, no, you're totally wrong.
Well, my thinking is that they were fairly young,
Yeah.
and they would be at the age where, at least in our culture, we would think, somebody younger
Yeah.
feel that, they're indestructible and they can go out and do anything.
Yeah. And Peter is going to learn that he's not.
Yeah.
34. I assure you, Jesus said to him, tonight, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. All right. Even if I have to die with you, Peter told him, I will never deny you. And all the disciples said the same thing. Okay. Well, we know how that's going to end up. Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he told the disciples, sit here while I go over there and pray. Taking along Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. Then he said to them, my soul is swallowed up in sorrow to the point of death. Remain here and stay awake with me. Going a little further, he fell face down and prayed, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not as I will, but as you will. Then he came to the disciples and found them sleeping. He asked Peter, so couldn't you stay awake with me 1 hour? Stay awake and pray, so that you won't enter into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Again, a second time, he went away and prayed, my Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done. And he came again and found them sleeping, because they could not keep their eyes open. After leaving them, he went away again and prayed a 3rd time, saying the same thing once more. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the time is near. The Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let's go. My betrayer is near. So why do you think we have this exchange?
Because Peter has just said, I will never fail you.
Mm-hmm. And then he fails 3 times.
Yeah. And
Right.
this isn't even the 3 times that he's.
Yeah, this isn't even the specific 3 times,
Yeah.
but he fails 3 times immediately right after saying that he'll go with Jesus even unto death, and he can't even stay awake. Right?
I think it's all about the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. I think it's all about that
Yeah.
statement.
I kind of agree. And I think that's an important thing, because you don't want to give people the impression that God is asking something of them that is completely impossible. Right? Like, we know where all these disciples are going to end up. They're all going to end up martyred. They're all going to be brutally killed before the end of this story, right? Well, not before the end of this story specifically, but by the end of the 1st century, all of them get killed, right? And these are the same guys, like, who completely fail at doing something like staying awake, right? So we can't say that they aren't committed.
Mhm.
They're all eventually willing to die for this, right? They all know the truth. They're all believers in God. They're all willing to die, but there's just some things they can't do.
They're human,
Right.
as we all are.
Right.
I think that's the point.
Yeah. And God doesn't expect inhuman greatness from human beings. That would be like expecting your dog to understand you when you say, don't chew my shoes. It just doesn't work. Right?
Well, even the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. You can just apply that back to 35.
Yeah.
I'm sure Peter believed himself when he said it.
He probably did.
But I mean, everyone's the hero in their own story.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really easy to say, well, we do it a lot more in the past. I would have done, if I was faced with that, I would have done this.
Right.
He's just doing it in the future. Oh, if I'm faced, well, it's really easy to say that. And then when we can see it with him, when he's actually confronted with it, well, now it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. 47. While he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, suddenly arrived. A large mob with swords and clubs was with him from the chief priests and the elders of the people. His betrayer had given them a sign, The one I kiss, he is the one. Arrest him. So I think we have to assume that evidently at least some of these people didn't know who Jesus was.
It kind of sounds like the chief priests, the elders, and the leaders weren't there.
Yeah.
They just said, "Okay, you
Yeah,
guys
this
go out to
This is a
place,"
contingent. Yeah.
And,
Mhm.
and I
They,
think
they sent him out.
somewhere it even said that there were some Roman soldiers with them, or
Mm,
maybe just the temple soldiers. I don't
maybe.
Well, I mean, I guess it does make sense because if Jesus has been followed around by huge crowds, for the last 3 years or whatever,
Mhm.
then a lot of people have probably only seen him at a distance.
It's true.
And I've always seen him amongst that group of 10, 11 other guys.
Yeah.
12, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, and the idea that this is a massive crowd. It's late at night. It's dark.
Mhm.
Torches don't really
Yeah.
light that well.
It's not like they have a picture.
Yeah.
And you can picture in the chaos them grabbing the wrong person if somebody doesn't identify it. This is who you take.
Yeah. hmm Well, and you might even assume that one of his followers might step in and try to take the fall.
Oh,
You
that's
know.
a good point. Yeah.
But hey, if you don't have people who really specifically know, I guess you got to find somebody willing to betray him, right? Also, kind of interesting. Judas knows where they're going to be.
Well, also the needing someone to betray him. If you're not, we could see that the chief priests and elders aren't there because
Yeah.
this mob is from them.
Yeah.
They certainly know who Jesus was.
Yeah. Well, he's insulted them to their face.
Yeah. But if you're not going to be there yourself to make sure they get the right guy, then I guess
Yeah.
you do have to have someone who knows.
Mhm.
They're
Yeah.
probably afraid of him anyway.
And I think the hint throughout is that this is like a common place they would go to meet.
hmm Yeah, because Judas knows where and when to be there. Yep. Okay. 49. So he went right up to Jesus and said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. "Friend," Jesus asked, "why have you come?" And this is a little bit of theatrics because Jesus knows exactly why he's there. He told him earlier that night he was going to be betrayed by this guy, right?
And he just said, "My betrayer is near."
Right. Then they came up, took hold of Jesus, and arrested him. At that moment, one of those with Jesus reached out his hand and drew his sword. He struck the high priest's slave and cut off his ear. And Matthew is being kind to Peter and not mentioning that this was indeed Peter.
Well, I mean, it fits. He was kind to Judas earlier.
Yeah. You know,
Of all people.
Matthew seems to be a fairly charitable writer.
Yeah.
Which is interesting for a former tax collector.
It is interesting for a former tax collector. Yeah.
Now, back to 50,
Mhm.
and this translation, the Lexham English Bible says,
Yeah.
Jesus said to him, "Friend, do that for which you have come."
Yeah. I kind of feel like
So
that's
it's
a
not
better.
question, it's more of a
Yeah.
statement.
I feel like it does work better as a statement than as a question because it's kind of a nonsensical question. Okay. Then Jesus told him, "Put your sword back in its place, because all who take up a sword will perish by a sword. Or do you think that I cannot call on my Father, and he will provide me at once with more than 12 legions of angels? How then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen in this way?" And this is a big hint, right? This has been the point. This has been the plan, like forever, right? How many times when we've been reading in the past, the previous 25 chapters, how many times has Matthew said, this happened so that the scriptures would be fulfilled, right? And I mean, the whole way, Jesus keeps quoting from Old Testament prophets saying, oh yeah, this is pointing back to this. He just said, like, I have to die because this scripture said, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep will scatter, right?
The Arabic still has it as a question. Why have you come?
Interesting.
I would assume they're probably closer to.
Well,
I'm not
you
sure
can
what
look
this
at
would
it
be
as
in.
sort of a rhetorical.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or it's one of those, even back in Genesis, we see God giving Adam and Eve, and he's asking them where they are. He's giving them a chance
Right.
of.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of languages, the the very same wording
Uh-huh.
can be either a question or a statement, just depending on the inflection, the vocal inflection.
Yeah, and it also
in the
matters.
situation.
It also matters what the translation philosophy of the people that produced the translation was,
Yeah.
because some people want to create like a one-for-one equivalence, which is completely impossible and never works. But they want to get as close to that as they can because they're looking at trying to preserve accuracy. Some people say, well, I don't necessarily care about preserving the accuracy the same way as I care about preserving idiomatic reading.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of ways to prioritize a translation, and none of them are actually wrong. What verse are we on?
52?
52. That looks about right. Cut off an ear. Yeah. Then Jesus told him, put your sword back in its place.
Sorry, we are.
I think it might be
Yeah.
54 or 55. I think
54 or 55. Yeah, you're right. We already did read that thing. Okay. Speaking of the 12 legions, why would you get the impression that Jesus could summon 12 legions of angels just by asking? Where would that come from?
Well, going back to the him calming the storm, it's just I wouldn't be at that point. I wouldn't be surprised if that's something you. I
So-
don't know if he's mentioned something like that.
Specifically,
Yeah.
like how many times have we said Matthew keeps pointing back to Ezekiel?
Okay.
True.
How many times in Ezekiel or in any other Old Testament passage is the term Lord of Hosts used?
Mm,
Right?
yeah,
And that is specifically a military term,
Yeah.
right?
Interesting.
All right, moving on. 55. At that time, Jesus said to the crowds, "Why have you come out with swords and clubs as if I were a criminal to capture me? Every day I used to sit teaching in the temple complex, and you didn't arrest me. But all this has happened so that the prophetic scriptures would be fulfilled." Then all the disciples deserted him and ran away. I don't know why I found that funny, but it's kind of absurd.
It's just kind of tacked on there as, oh
Yeah.
yeah, they left.
Yeah, they all bailed, right? But Jesus is definitely sticking on message, right? This is all going exactly as according to plan.
But that goes back to the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, he told them this was going to happen. And yet, I mean, what did he specifically say? But after I have been resurrected, I will go ahead of you to Galilee. So right after he says, by the way, you're all going to desert me, but it's going to be cool. We're going to meet later in Galilee. Like, it's so easy to focus on the desertion part and forget that God already knows about the desertion part and is looking ahead to the reconnecting part, right?
My thought is, I would have been out of there when I saw the folks coming.
Yeah,
I got a roast in the oven. Bye.
right. I mean, like, yeah, the Son of Man must be killed as according to the scriptures, but his pals, we weren't in fact written about.
I mean, you know, it's, as Justin suggested earlier, that you know, a lot of people say, well, if I'd been there, I would have.
Oh, yeah.
Different.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Well, and you could even maybe look for a little bit of a message in there because there's 12 disciples, right? 12 disciples were representing maybe perhaps 12 tribes, although they aren't, of course, actually from the 12 tribes. But there's a pretty heavy set of luggage on that number, right? So perhaps there's something to be said there about, well, wouldn't all Israelites do exactly as these ones did? I don't know. You could maybe make that argument.
And I think the disciples are still in denial. I
Yeah.
mean, the very sentence right before it is, I used to sit teaching in the temple and you didn't arrest me, but all this happened so that the writings of prophets would be fulfilled. And then
Yeah.
the disciples go, I can't handle this.
Yeah. And then they bail.
Or maybe that's finally the one that made it click.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thought, oh, this is in the scriptures.
Mm-hmm. All right. 57. Those who had arrested Jesus led him away to Caiaphas the high priest, where the scribes and the elders had convened. Now, this part had to suck because he is being led back into a room filled with people that he's insulted. Meanwhile, Peter was following him at a distance, right to the high priest's courtyard. he went in and was sitting with the temple police to see the outcome. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false testimony against Jesus so they could put him to death, but they could not find any, even though many false witnesses came forward. Finally, 2 who came forward stated, "This man said, I can demolish God's sanctuary and rebuild it in 3 days." Now, this is a reference to a previous statement that was made in, I want to say, that was the beginning of chapter 24. Yeah. So, yeah, Jesus did say that, but his disciples understood at the time that he was talking about something else. It's pretty obvious he's talking about something else because nobody would think that you would rebuild a temple in 3 days, right?
Well, especially that temple, which
Right.
really took like decades to fully build.
Exactly. And, maybe you could make the argument, well, God could do it. Well, yeah, of course God could do it. But if you were thinking about God establishing a temple, well, when he established Eden, which has lots of parallels with the Jewish temple, that took 7 for a reason.
John 2:21, but
Yeah.
he was speaking about the temple of his body.
Yeah, so it's pretty clearly an allusion to something else. But of course, they're looking for just anything. So they're going to flip that and, do whatever they want with it no matter what.
Yep.
The high priest then stood up and said to him, "Don't you have an answer to what these men are testifying against you?" But Jesus kept silent. Then they would have hated anything he said anyway, right?
Well,
Lost my place.
Before in other encounters, when he
63.
said something, we refuted him, and then they had nothing
Yeah,
to do.
yeah.
But here,
I mean, you
he
can't.
doesn't say anything, so
That's-
they could proceed.
That's a good point, because if he does what he usually does and completely annihilates their arguments, then maybe they won't be able to kill him.
Mhm.
And they need to be able to kill him for the scripture to be fulfilled. Okay, 62. But Jesus kept silent. Then the high priest said to him, "By the living God, I place you under oath. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." "You have said it," Jesus told them, "but I tell you, in the future, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven." And that right there is a 100% claim to deity.
Mm.
In particular, the cloud writing thing
Well, on the right hand.
and the right hand thing, right? There's no way you can read that, especially if you're looking at any Old Testament scripture, and not see that as a claim to deity. Not even necessarily claiming to be the God of the Israelites, right? But the thing about clouds, we've said this before, that was an epithet that was usually applied to Baal. And the Old Testament writers loved to grab that and apply the cloud rider theme to the God of the Israelites in order to basically throw shade, right? And they filled the Old Testament with those references. And here Jesus grabs one and says, "This is how you'll see me," right? So
and he's using imagery that they would understand.
Exactly. Using imagery that they would understand, sprinkling in a little bit more Son of Man to throw them back to Ezekiel, and then putting in this very explicit claim to godhood, right? So all he's doing, of course, is confirming what the high priest asked. Anyway, then the high priest tore his robes and said, "He has blasphemed. Why do we still need witnesses? Look, now you've heard the blasphemy. What is your decision?" Now, he's half right here, right? Because it is blasphemy to make yourself equal with God, unless you're God.
Mhm.
And then it's just truth. Yeah, it's just reality otherwise, right? So he's correct in saying, yeah, like a person should not make themselves equal with God. That's blasphemy. However, Jesus has already proved in the previous 25 chapters that he is in fact God. The high priest is conveniently not paying attention to any of that. All right. Look, you've heard his blasphemy. What is your decision? They answered, "He deserves death." Then they spit in his face and beat him. Others slapped him and said, "Prophesy to us, Messiah, who hit you?" Now Peter was standing outside in the courtyard. A servant approached him, and she said, "You were with Jesus the Galilean too." But he denied it in front of everyone. "I don't know what you're talking about." Then he went, when he had gone out to the gateway, another woman saw him and told those who were who were there, sorry, I can't English anymore. This man was with Jesus the Nazarene. And again, he denied it with an oath, "I don't know the man." After a little while, those standing there approached and said to Peter, "You certainly are one of them, since even your accent gives you away." Then he started to curse and to swear with an oath, "I do not know the man." Immediately a rooster crowed, and Peter remembered the words Jesus had spoken, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." And he went outside and wept bitterly. So Peter is confronted with his own fallibility, right? The weakness of his own flesh, despite the fact that, I mean, you can't argue that Peter's not committed, right? He's just a guy, you know? I don't even think it would make sense to say Peter was cowardly. He's not. He's just a guy. He's just not a superhero.
The fact that he going along and keeping watch from a distance even shows some courage.
Yeah, and I just find it, I think it's an important thing to remember that God had no expectation that Peter would do superhuman things.
Yeah.
God flat out told Peter, "You will utterly fail to do those things.
Yeah.
You're completely going to deny me," right? Now, the other thing that this causes a little bit of an issue with, do we want to start this fight now? Let's start the fight now. Let's just sprinkle it in there. So this causes a little bit of a problem for the people who say that if you ever deny God, you are not a Christian.
Okay, well, I guess the example would be if somebody, say, in the Middle East
Mm-hmm.
is drug in and said, deny you're a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody says, "Oh, no, I'm not."
Yeah. I mean,
Because, they know what's going to happen if they say yes.
yeah. And Peter knew what was going to happen, and he forcefully denied 3 times in a row, exactly as predicted, that he was associated in any way with Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And then,
he could hear what's going on, and
Mhm.
it's okay, he deserves death. And you think, well,
yep.
by association. And
Yep. And then what happens? Jesus comes back later and no, it's cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy to read this and Peter gets a bad rap
Yeah.
for it. But I mean, think about it. He's in a situation where he thinks if he answers truthfully, he's going to die right now.
Right.
That's a hard place to be in to tell the truth.
Right.
Tell the truth and die.
Right.
now.
So,
Especially if you've already been told by Jesus that this is going to happen.
right. So I think the message there for us today, looking back at that, is maybe we shouldn't sit in God's place and try to determine for other people what God will and will not forgive, because we don't have that privilege, right? I mean, by the standards of some of the people in the evangelical church today, Peter should not be a Christian, but he kind of is, like, by definition.
One of the big ones.
Yeah,
On
you know,
this rock, I will build my church.
you sort of have to throw out a good chunk of the New Testament if you're going to discount Peter on that
Yeah.
basis,
Yeah.
right?
Basically, if Peter's story cut off right here,
Mm-hmm.
maybe they'd have an argument.
Right, but it doesn't.
Yeah.
It goes on, right? And of course, we have, like, all of the other disciples abandoned Jesus as well. And I'm sure if they were asked at the same time, they might have answered very similarly to the way Peter did. But at what point did Jesus actually expect them to deny him, even if that led?
the propagation of the gospel.
Right. So on the one hand, that doesn't give people license to deny God, deny Christ, deny the gospel simply to make their lives easier,
Mm-hmm.
right? But on the other hand, I think it also argues that we can't usurp God's right of judgment on other people over what they say and do, because God is ultimately the one who gets to judge whether or not they're really loyal to him, whether or not they're really a believer.
Right.
That's simple. That's easy.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, I've been yammering for an hour. Those of you who joined the stream late, or God forbid, people who look this up after the fact, skip about the first 10 or 11 minutes because we don't really talk about anything interesting in that time. I would say that I'll see you all, but at least some of those people I won't see next week because they're going to be on the computer. But yeah, bye. We'll do the next chapter later.